Welcome back to the True Crime Collection, where Jen and Brian are diving into the world's most chilling crimes. From unsolved mysteries to dark endeavors, they uncover the stories that will keep you hooked. This is the True Crime Collection.
You know, when you think about notorious family dramas, the Menendez brothers really have to be right up there.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's 1989, Beverly Hills, the height of excess.
Right.
And you've got this seemingly perfect family just shattered by a brutal double murder.
Yeah.
It's a case that's both captivating and disturbing. Right?
Absolutely. And I think what makes the Menendez case so fascinating is that it goes so far beyond, just a simple whodunit.
Right.
It forces us to grapple with these really uncomfortable questions about family dynamics, wealth, privilege, and sort of the dark side of the American dream.
Yeah.
And it's a story that just continues to resonate decades later.
And that's exactly why we're diving into it today, going beyond just the headlines and the sensationalism.
Absolutely.
You've given me a ton of material on this case, articles, court transcripts, tons of psychological analyses.
Right.
And we're going to try to sift through it all and get to the heart of what happened.
I think what's so interesting is how this case, from the very beginning, became this real cultural touchstone. It tapped into our collective fascination with the lives of the rich and famous.
Right.
This idea that even behind these manicured lawns and these gated mansions, there can be these deep, dark secrets.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's set the scene a little bit. It's 1989 in Los Angeles, and the city's kind of this powder keg, right? You've got the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, but also this undercurrent of tension. Rising crime rates, gang violence, economic uncertainty. It feels like a city on the edge.
Yeah, it was a city of contrasts.
Yeah.
And I think that context is crucial for understanding the Menendez family.
Okay.
Because they were living in this bubble of privilege in Beverly Hills, seemingly insulated from all of the chaos that was swirling around them.
Right.
But even within that bubble, there was this sense of unease.
Yeah.
This feeling that the American dream, the promise of upward mobility wasn't as secure as it once seemed.
Right, yeah.
That anxiety was pervasive.
Interesting, okay.
And, within that context, we have the Menendez family themselves.
Yeah, so let's talk about them. From what I've read, José Menendez, the patriarch, was just this classic embodiment of that late 20th century drive.
Right.
This Cuban immigrant who came to America with nothing, clawed his way to the top of the entertainment industry.
Yeah, a real self-made man.
Exactly.
But, I think José's story is also about the price of that ambition.
Okay.
The pressure he put on himself and ultimately on his sons.
Right.
His drive for success was fueled by this need to prove himself.
Yeah.
To achieve the American dream, on his own terms. But that relentless pursuit of status and wealth created this real pressure cooker atmosphere in the family, especially for Lyle and Erik.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
And then there's Kitty Menendez, the mother. The sources paint this picture of her as this really beautiful socialite.
Right.
But also someone who struggled deeply with her own demons.
Right. Yeah, there's this real sadness to Kitty's story.
Yeah.
Alcohol abuse, prescription drug use, this underlying unhappiness that she tried to conceal behind this facade of Beverly Hills perfection.
Yeah, it's like this classic story of, trying to keep up with the Joneses, but on a whole other level.
Exactly. And, Kitty's story often gets overshadowed by the more sensational aspects of the case.
Right.
But I think it's crucial to understanding the family dynamic.
Yeah, I think so too.
She represents the hidden struggles of women in these high-pressure environments.
Yeah.
The expectation to maintain a certain image even when things are falling apart behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's like this impossible standard.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this really intense family dynamic brewing.
Yeah.
And then within that, you've got Lyle and Erik. Lyle, the older brother, seemed to, at least on the surface, embrace his father's ambition.
Right.
But he also had this rebellious streak.
Yeah.
I mean, he got kicked out of Princeton for stealing.
He did.
Yeah.
Lyle's behavior, I think, is fascinating because it seems like he's both trying to live up to his father's expectations and then simultaneously rebel against them.
It's like he's trying to do both at the same time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it raises these questions about how much of our personality is innate.
Yeah.
And how much is shaped by the environment we're raised in.
Right.
Was Lyle's rebellion a cry for help? A way of pushing back against this suffocating pressure that he felt?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you've got Erik, the younger brother,
Okay.
who's described as more sensitive, more artistic.
Yeah.
But also, it sounds like he felt the weight of his father's expectations even more acutely than Lyle did. I mean, he was a talented tennis player.
Yeah.
But from what I've read, it seems like he could never quite measure up in his father's eyes.
Right. And that's where I think the psychological aspect of this case gets really interesting.
Okay.
Erik's behavior, his withdrawal, could be seen as this classic, freeze response to trauma.
Okay.
When a child is constantly under pressure, especially in a home environment that feels unsafe or invalidating,
Right.
Yeah, they might retreat inward as a way of self-preservation.
Wow. Okay, so fast forward now to August 20th, 1989, the night of the murders.
Right.
And from what I've read, it was just a regular evening for José and Kitty.
Yeah.
Relaxing in the den, watching TV,
Right.
completely unaware of what was about to happen.
That contrast, I think, is really chilling.
Yeah.
The utter normalcy of that evening makes the brutality that followed all the more shocking.
Right.
It wasn't a heated argument that escalated into violence.
Right.
This was a calculated, premeditated attack.
And the level of violence was just horrific.
It was.
The brothers, armed with shotguns, walked into that den and opened fire. José was shot in the back of the head, killing him instantly.
Right.
Kitty tried to run, but they chased her down, firing multiple times.
The sheer number of shots fired.
Yeah.
The way they pursued Kitty as she tried to escape.
Right.
It speaks to a level of rage that goes beyond simply silencing their parents.
Yeah.
It's as though they wanted to completely obliterate them,
Right.
to erase them from existence.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Right away, the police were suspicious, right?
Oh, yeah. Immediately.
No forced entry valuables left untouched.
Right.
It just didn't fit the profile of a typical burglary.
It didn't at all.
Yeah. And Sergeant Grundy, one of the lead detectives, started focusing on the brothers' behavior. And let's be honest, it was pretty incriminating from the get-go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
While claiming to be grief-stricken, they embark on this massive spending spree.
Right.
A Porsche for Lyle, a Rolex for Erik, luxury vacations.
Yeah.
They were throwing money around like it was going out of style.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of behavior obviously fuels public suspicion, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the context of 1989, pre-internet, pre-social media. But the Menendez case was everywhere.
Oh, yeah, it was a media sensation.
Yeah, this relatively unknown family was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, and the media was having a field day.
Yeah, and that media frenzy undoubtedly played a role in shaping public perception.
Oh, for sure.
The narrative.
Yeah. Okay, but then things take a major turn.
They do.
Erik, remember, had been seeing a therapist, Dr. Ozio.
Right.
And during one session, he breaks down and confesses to the murders.
Right.
And what's even more shocking is that Uziel had recorded this confession.
He did.
Which, of course, becomes a key piece of evidence for the prosecution.
This is where the case shifts dramatically.
Okay.
The confession itself, I think, isn't surprising given the evidence.
Right.
But what Erik reveals during that therapy session throws everything into a new light.
Yeah, because suddenly they're not just claiming to be innocent.
Right.
They're alleging that they had endured years of horrific abuse at the hands of their father,
Right.
both physical and emotional.
Yeah, they describe this terrifying picture of José as this tyrannical, abusive figure,
Wow.
and Kitty as either complicit or too afraid to intervene.
So it completely reframes the case.
Complete.
It was no longer just about greed.
Right.
It was about survival. The brothers were now claiming that they felt trapped, that they killed their parents because they saw no other way out of this horrific situation they'd been living in for years.
Right. And that's where the Menendez case gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because now you have this incredibly divided public opinion.
Yeah,
Some people wholeheartedly believed the brothers,
right.
seeing them as victims of horrific abuse
Mm.
who had been driven to this desperate act.
Right, right.
And others remained skeptical,
Yeah.
viewing the abuse allegations as a cynical ploy to manipulate the justice system and escape punishment for this cold-blooded, premeditated murder.
So you've got this incredible tension, this battle of narratives playing out in the public sphere.
Yeah, real clash of perspective.
Exactly. And it all culminates in this incredibly dramatic trial.
It does.
Which, let's be honest, had all the elements of a Hollywood movie itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a media spectacle. And the trial itself became this battleground of narratives,
Yeah.
each side fighting to control the story. The prosecution came in strong,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
focusing on the forensic evidence, the brothers' extravagant spending after the murders, and the seemingly calculated nature of the killings.
Right.
Their argument was pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
This was cold-blooded murder driven by greed.
But the defense team took a huge gamble.
They did.
Instead of denying the murders, they leaned hard into the abuse claims.
Right.
They called in witnesses, people who knew the Menendez family, to testify about what they'd seen and heard.
Yeah.
Housekeepers who described Jose's controlling behavior, friends who had witnessed arguments, and then experts who could speak to the psychological effects of long-term abuse.
It was a high-risk strategy, especially at that time.
Yeah.
Defense attorneys often avoid claiming abuse.
Right.
Especially when there are no prior police reports or clear physical evidence.
Right.
But in this case, they felt like it was their only shot at saving Lyle and Erik from the death penalty.
And it was definitely a powerful strategy. I mean, Lyle and Erik both took the stand themselves, recounting years of alleged abuse.
Right.
The courtroom became incredibly emotional.
Yeah.
People were openly weeping as the brothers described the things they'd supposedly endured.
But the prosecution wasn't backing down.
Right.
They attacked the brothers' stories, pointing out inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Questioning why they'd never reported the abuse before.
Uh-huh.
They argued that these claims were a complete fabrication, a desperate attempt to manipulate the jury into feeling sorry for them.
So it really became this question of who to believe.
Right.
Was it the seemingly remorseful sons who claimed they were victims driven to this desperate act?
Right.
Or was it the prosecution's portrayal of them as these cold, calculating killers motivated solely by money?
That's the heart of the Menendez case, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
It forces us to confront these uncomfortable gray areas.
Yeah.
Where the lines between victim and perpetrator become blurred.
Right.
We're drawn to these stories because they challenge our assumptions about good and evil.
Right.
And make us grapple with the complexity of human behavior.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the jury couldn't reconcile those competing narratives.
They couldn't.
They sided with the prosecution, finding both Lyle and Erik guilty of first-degree murder.
Right.
They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
That verdict sent shockwaves through the country.
Oh, yeah.
It felt like a message that even if the abuse allegations were true,
right,
the act of murder itself was simply too unforgivable.
Yeah.
The justice system, at least in this case, struggled to balance the horror of the crime with the possibility of mitigating circumstances.
And of course, the media went into overdrive.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone had an opinion on the verdict, debating whether justice had been served, whether the brothers had been unfairly punished, whether the system had failed them, whether they'd gamed the system.
Right.
It was endless.
And that's where I think the Menendez case goes beyond a simple true crime story.
Yeah.
And becomes this reflection of our own societal values.
Right.
How do we weigh the severity of a crime against the possibility of mitigating circumstances like abuse?
Right.
When does a victim become a perpetrator in the eyes of the law?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It is.
It also raised a lot of awareness about the prevalence of abuse.
It did.
Particularly within families.
Yeah.
The Menendez brothers' claims, whether you believe them or not, brought the issue of domestic violence into the national spotlight.
Absolutely.
It forced people to confront the reality that these horrific things can happen even in seemingly perfect families.
And that's one of the reasons why I think this case continues to fascinate us.
Yeah.
Decades later.
Uh-huh.
It exposed the limitations of our legal system.
Yeah.
Its inability to always neatly categorize human behavior or fully account for the complexities of individual lives.
So where are they now all these years later?
Lyle and Erik are still in prison,
Okay.
each coping with their life sentences in different ways.
Yeah.
Lyle has apparently become a mentor to younger inmates, trying to use his experience to help them navigate the prison system.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about Erik?
Erik is focused on art and writing,
Okay.
finding ways to express himself and process his experiences through creator outlets.
So it's almost as if they're both trying to reconstruct their identities within the confines of prison life.
Right.
To find meaning and purpose in a situation that seems utterly hopeless.
Exactly. It's such a stark contrast to the privilege they once had.
It really is, yeah.
And what about the Menendez mansion?
Oh, yeah. What happened to that?
It's been sold and resold multiple times since the murders.
Wow.
But it still carries this dark legacy.
Yeah, for sure.
It's become almost like a physical embodiment of the case itself.
Right.
This beautiful facade hiding dark secrets.
Yeah.
A reminder that even in the most affluent neighborhoods, tragedy can lurk beneath the surface.
And that brings us back to the big question that still kind of hangs over this case,
Right?
Did the abuse actually happen? I mean, after all these years, there's still no definitive answer.
There isn't.
Some people who knew the Menendez family have corroborated parts of the brothers' stories.
Yeah.
But others remain skeptical.
Right.
It's this question that continues to fuel debate and speculation.
That uncertainty, I think, is a big part of why this case is so enduring.
Yeah.
You know, why we're still talking about it all these years later.
Yeah.
We're left with these competing narratives.
Yeah.
These conflicting pieces of information.
Right.
And it's impossible to know for sure what the truth is.
Right.
You know, it becomes a Rorschach test, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
What you believe about the Menendez brothers often says more about your own worldview than about the case itself.
It's fascinating how this case really forces us to confront the limitations of our legal system.
Yeah.
I mean, a trial is supposed to determine guilt or innocence,
Right.
but it's not always equipped to deal with, the messy realities of human relationships or the long-term impact of trauma. It often comes down to which side can present the most compelling narrative, you know, the most convincing story.
And in the Menendez case, the jury was ultimately swayed by the prosecution's narrative.
Yeah, they were.
But even with a guilty verdict, so many questions remain unanswered.
Right.
Did the abuse truly happen?
Yeah.
Was it the driving force behind the murders?
Right.
Or was it just a convenient story concocted to manipulate the system?
Right.
We may never know for sure.
So what can we take away from this deep dive into the Menendez murders?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a case that's both fascinating and incredibly disturbing.
it is.
It's hard to shake the feeling that it was a tragedy on so many levels.
For me, the Menendez case serves as a cautionary tale.
Okay.
It's a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition.
Yeah.
You know, the immense pressure it can create within families and the devastating consequences when that pressure reaches a breaking point.
Right.
It also highlights the complexities of abuse, you know,
Yeah.
how it can fester in secrecy and the lasting trauma it can inflict on its victims.
It also reminds us that the truth is rarely simple or straightforward.
No, it's not.
It's often messy and complicated,
Right.
full of contradictions and gray areas.
Absolutely.
And it challenges us to be cautious about rushing to judgment, to consider the multiple perspectives in any story, and to recognize that there are often more questions than answers.
Exactly. And that's the power of true crime, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
Right.
It makes us question our assumptions about good and evil and grapple with the complexities of human behavior.
Right.
And in doing so, it can hopefully lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the society we live in.
Well said. This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And for anyone listening who wants to go even deeper,
Yeah,
there are some amazing resources out there.
there are.
Books, documentaries, podcasts.
Right.
They delve into the Menendez case from every angle, offering different perspectives and insights.
I always recommend The Menendez Murders,
Hmm.
the shocking untold story of a Beverly Hills dynasty by Robert Rand.
Okay.
He really digs into the family history,
Okay.
the dynamics between the brothers and their parents, and the events leading up to that tragic night.
It's a case that stays with you long after you finish writing about it.
Oh, absolutely.
So there you have it.
Yeah.
Our deep dive into the Menendez murders, a story of wealth privilege, family secrets, and ultimately tragedy.
Right.
A case that, even after all these years, continues to captivate and haunt us.
It does.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. And as always, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those minds open.